15, and he literally freaked out. Like, oh my God, all of his friends are going to definitely be watching too. Yeah.
What's his name?
Carl with a K, and I met a Carl in the lobby, but it's a C. But yeah.
That's not a human, a non-human Carl. Yeah. Well, what's up, human Carl?
Yeah.
So, first of all, are you the only guy that figured out that you don't have to wear suits when you're a senator?
Yeah. No, it's. I'm sorry. What was that?
I said, are you the only guy that figured out that you don't have to wear suits as a senator?
Oh, okay. Yeah, no. I know it seems strange, but it's like, I mean, I'm a bigger guy, and I can't afford custom anyway, and I'm claustrophobic, and I hate them being in that kind of shit, and I've always dressed like shit, and you know, and I know, and then that whole thing kind of got away of us. People assumed that there was a dress code issue there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I wasn't behind that. But of course, everybody pointed at the dude that dresses like a slob, and then the whole nation just had like a meltdown, like, oh my God, the Senate's on fire because I dress like a slob. But my life is just much better in D.C. That unless that I'm going to be on the floor, that I'm not going to be. You're never going to see me in a suit.
Like shit.
And I think that's a more authentic kind of way that I live. And I don't judge anybody on how they dress or those things. I just dress this way. And there's also practical issues as well too. Like I have chopstick legs and I have no ass and I can't keep pants up. and hoodies, it's like I don't have to iron that shit. You know, so it's just like easy, it's comfort. And I just feel like that's. I mean, if somebody dresses, people have said that, but it's like I'd rather have somebody know. I promise you, especially in Western country, love to wear suits all year. I mean, shorts all year, and dress like that. But to me, it's not comfort and practical.
Well, I mean, it makes sense. The whole dress code thing, wearing suits, and you're more serious because you have certain clothing on. It seems pretty silly.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Are you so? Let's tell everybody what's going on with your iPad. So because you had a stroke, you have difficulty. Do you have difficulty hearing, or?
Well, no, I can hear just perfectly right now, but there's just one kind of a lingering issue. There's a lingering issue, and sometimes I lose just a couple steps on time, and then now after that, that's the only thing. And thankfully, the stroke never touched my intellect. Things, but the stroke nearly killed me, and again I don't. But I use captioning in situations just like this, in interviews. That's why I can really make sure exactly what's being said, and then I can just participate. If somebody wears the glasses, it doesn't mean that they're illiterate. It just means that's a tool that allows them to participate or drive or those things. And it's that same thing. And a lot of people across America use captioning to watch movies and TV, and that's really no different from that.
So it doesn't affect your intellect, but it does affect your hearing? Is that what's going on?
No, I can hear connected to music. The difference with music, for example, is that as long as there's muscle memories, I can remember all those kinds of music things. But it seems unlikely at this point that they're not going to be any kind of new favorites emerging like that, because
so you essentially only can listen to the same old music forever.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Let's see what we find here.
all the classics, like Metallica, Motorhead, the Cult, all those kinds of things. Like I haven't lost any of the Def Leppard and those things. Well, I saw the record of Whitesnake, but all those things. Yeah, I mean, I think we're both in the 50s, right? And we grew up with the Crew and all those kinds of things. So some people might judge me based on my taste on music, but I mean, kind of weird.
Listen, people are going to judge you no matter what. You're a big giant guy who wears hoodies and you're selling. No matter what, they're going to judge you. Who cares? But I'm just trying to understand what is going on with the captioning, because you can hear, but so there's some sort of a disconnect between hearing and understanding. What is it?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessarily disconnect. It's just about the just to make sure that those things. So it's really just about captioning. It's just a tool, no difference. I mean, for this is like my eyes, in the sense for glasses. That just
Right, I understand. So it just gives you a little bit more precision in what you're saying.
Yeah,
and understanding. What was it like running for senator right after recovering from a stroke? That had to be a nightmare.
Yeah, I don't recommend that. I don't recommend that.
Because you seem to have recovered quite a bit since then.
Oh yeah, no.
During that time, you were really struggling. And
Sure, absolutely. Like it was a rough conversation. They brought me into the hospital, and then I went under, and then I woke up, and they said, hey, we got it, we got the clot. There's the clot that essentially just killed me. And I'm like, oh, that's good. And then just kind of went back under. And at that point, I had no idea where we were at on those things. And then I had, the next morning, I woke up, and then a doctor came on, and he had kind of a grin, kind of a look on his face and things. And my dad was there sitting next to me at the bed, and I was like, well, hey, Doc, what do you think? And he's like, well, your heart is functioning at an incredibly low kinds of percentage. And I'm like, well, what do you think? And he was like, well, there's some issues. And I'm like, well, are we talking, maybe a year kind of thing? And I'm like,
and this was all while you were running for Senate?
Yeah. This was 3 days before the primary.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I was on my way to an event, and my wife Giselle, she's like, you're having a stroke, because they had a classic kind of where half of my face. I didn't know that, but it kind of slumped. Yeah, and they hotlined me over to the hospital, and I wouldn't have survived if we were in a different. I mean, there's parts of Pennsylvania, and that's part of the tragic. That if I wasn't close to the kinds of hospital that I was, it's 100% that I wouldn't have survived that. And it got me there in enough time, and they were able to. There was an expert there, and I actually had. I met that doctor that literally saved my life, and I'm like, oh my God. And he usually wasn't based in that hospital. He was usually out of Delaware, but he happened to be there, and he was here to give me an award for being that kind of an advocate for those things. I'm like, no, you deserve the award on that, and then I asked, really looking for like a countdown of like, well, what's the prognosis? And there wasn't much on that. And I had to, was I going to survive for long, or what's that going to look? And then of course, the entire majority on the Senate really was on the middle of it, and that's a big responsibility after that. And then, so the primary, it happened, and I actually had a really strong win, and I won all of 67 counties. Pennsylvania has 67 counties, and we carried every county, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and all across Pennsylvania. But at that point, I had a responsibility. It's like, am I able to recover, or am I going to be okay? And I would recommend being in that situation. But I made a commitment. More than anything, I was more worried about being around to be a dad. I mean, I have three young kids, and my wife, she lived through all of this. So at that point, it started. I was in the hospital for about 10 days, and I started to get better and better. The strength started to come back a little bit, but it was still rough. And it was very, very clear, though, that I had a capacity to. It's been impaired on hearing and those kinds of interactions, things. had to decide by August 15th, and that's my birthday, ironically, that if I step down by then or before, then they're going to have to find somebody to replace me on the primary, and that was going to be my dropout day.
So what was the operation? How did they do it? How did they remove the clot?
Enemy soldier!
Well, I mean, I had to originally, I had to go back to, I had to learn how to talk and speak. You know, I went to a speech therapist and had interaction and those kinds of things. And my hearing and those kinds of things were still impacted by that. And they had to monitor my heart because it was, it had effectively stopped. It actually stopped. And then my heart had to recover. So there was two kinds of things working there, you know, my heart. And then right before the primary, they walked in and they said, well, here's what I suggest. Here's what I suggest. Now, we are going to put a pacemaker. We're going to put in a pacemaker. And we're like, hey, that's the best thing. So they put that device right here. And for anyone that are not really what that is, a pacemaker, but that manages your heart. You know, so I had a significant issue with AFib. And that's really what did that to my heart. And they put that in, and then that was right before the primary, and they put me under, and
What year was this?
this was 22.
2022. And before you had this stroke, had you ever had any issues before with clotting or anything like that? Was this like
Not with clotting. You know, I have, for good things and for bad things, my heart was just like my father's. You know, and he had an issue with AFib, and he was in the hospital for...
So it's a genetic.
Yeah, genetic. And, but it was never an idea. There was never an idea that I was going to even having a stroke. That wasn't part of at least my thinking. I knew that I was in distress. You know, I could tell that my heart was in problem, and I was just going to get through this primary. I mean, there's a lot running on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then that it didn't work out because the stroke hit 3 days before, and then that forced me, and that put me on an incredibly different kind of a path after that.
And so where do they go in when they're removing the clot? Do they have to cut your skull open? Like, how do they get it out of there?
They went up in your vein, in your leg, and they went up in, and it's a remarkable technology that
through your leg, all the way up to your brain,
and they just sucked it out, and they actually had an X-ray or whatever, and you could see that, hey, we got it out, and I actually got to see, although I really was still kind of out of it, but that was the clot that all but took my life, and so. I mean, there were a lot of things there. You know, suddenly your mortality was kind of like put right there in front of it.
Yeah.
And through that.
Do they have any idea what caused the clot? Do they understand like what happened to you? My grandmother had an aneurysm, and it was a horrible situation. They didn't find her for several hours. Afterwards, my grandfather came home and she wasn't in the house, and then he found her in the backyard. She had collapsed, and they gave her 72 hours to live, and she lived for 12 years like that. It was horrible. My grandfather had to take care of her. It was really, really rough. So I'm always like really concerned with that kind of stuff. Like what causes it? Do they know?
Yeah, well,
It's time.
I mean, I had, for the first time in my life, and I hope it's the last time, that I'm confronted by this idea that the doctors weren't able to provide any kinds of certainty, or like, oh yeah, man, you're going to be okay, or things are going to be okay. That wasn't.
So they don't know what caused it.
Well, I mean, it was AFib, and my heart weakened, and the stress of the primary and on the ongoing kinds of issues. It was already weakened about that issue earlier, and everything kind of came together, and I guess my heart turned to the point that caused the clot, and then the clot that took my life.
So then you have to
Yeah, it's, I think,
We control the
I mean,
majority of sectors. Good job,
it's so
Topaz.
different. It's, I had a significant responsibility to stay in that and winning through all of those things, and that was difficult enough.
They're out there. Enemy contact.
It was an important
Our troops are full
conversation,
control of Sector
and
Delta.
we had to run a campaign. We had to run a campaign when it was difficult, and I wasn't working at the kind of capacity that was necessary, and that's we had to run up to the 15th of August and decide if we're going to stay in that because there's a lot riding on that.
And you were also competing against Dr. Oz, which was weird. You know, this guy who's a celebrity doctor who's
Our troops have taken
at
Sector
least a
Bravo.
little shady.
It necessarily was I think we were talking about captioning earlier right now, and I think we're having an issue.
Enemy armor there!
The captioning.
Is it not showing up?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a delay.
Well, maybe it's the way I said shady.
Yeah.
He's a little shady. Like he had been in trouble for talking about miracle diet remedies that weren't miracles at all, and I believe he got brought in front of Congress. So it was a little odd that that guy was running for Senate at all. Was he from Pennsylvania?
Yeah, well, Dr. Oz. Yeah, I think from a technology, I think we have to address the
Oh, is it messing up right now?
Yeah, I think the captioning is running a little bit behind on it.
Okay.
So can we make some technological?
Sure. Okay, we'll have a
Yeah, I think we are good. I think we're good to go. We put this on the Wi-Fi, so and it's working great.
All right, we're back. So what I was just saying that it was odd that you were running against Dr. Oz, and he's just kind of
Dr.
weird
Oz.
guy.
Yeah, and he was like really brilliant. I mean, he was like an amazing kind of celebrity, and then he turned his career into like on TV, and then he started to pitch more kinds of questionable kinds of things and kind of bullshit kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why somebody would change his reputation. I mean, he was really revered in that. And I would have been comfortable if him operate on me. But he kind of lost that. And what was also pretty funny is that he lived in New Jersey. And so we were like, hey, we need to use that in an outlet. So we decided early on that we were going to just like, hey, you know, it matters. It's like, I mean, there's nothing wrong with living on New Jersey, but it probably is an issue if you're running for the Senate. So, and I really have like an ethos is that I'm not ever going to be mean, and I'm not going to be personal about that. So we tried to have a lot of fun with the fact that he lives in New Jersey, and we just really just kept hitting him. And we had Snooki did like a cameo saying, "Gee, Mehmet, good luck. You know, I know things are going rough now, but you're going to be able to come back to New Jersey," and that got viral. And we did a lot of those viral kinds of moments. And you know, they have this thing where they have what's really penetrated, and you know, they have circles on things like what's really part of like people asking about Dr. Oz, and one of those zeros, the other is weird, but the biggest one, New Jersey. I mean, literally, New Jersey was.
That was the biggest one.
Yeah, like
Pennsylvania and New Jersey, even though they're neighbors, they do have a bit of a rivalry.
Yeah, well, of course, and you know, people have to understand that it's like a funny thing, and I mean, it borders with Pennsylvania, and that it really matters. It matters.
Yeah.
And of course, Dr. Oz he was strange in some sense, and we always try to have fun with making fun of him. Are you a fan of the scene?
Yeah.
Yeah, but we matched up perfectly with Dr. Nick. You know, Dr. Nick, Dr. Oz. And we found all the weird shit that Dr. Nick would say. And then they have a clip of Dr. Oz saying those kinds of things. And then that's that's where it was. And we had a lot of fun with that. And things, we all figured out, well, we chose to kind of empty the clip, metaphorically, and really start hitting him. You know, we went up on TV throughout the summer, and he was really put on his back, and he was essentially thinking to kind of take the summer off. And then our polling, we got up about 10, 11 points and things. you know, if anyone's listening ever heard of the 538, you know, they track on those races, and the highest percentage we had to win was, I think, about 84%, and things kept winning great, really great. And then I had to decide on my birthday, August 15th, and things were going so well, and I thought I'm like, okay. And then we decided to stay on that race, and that's what we did. And then, you know, post Labor Day, and oh my gosh, we just got nuked in a way that it's never been experienced that before. And then
How so? What do you mean?
$100 million of paid media to destroy you. I mean, just tear you apart. Every aspect of your life.
$100 million.
$100 million
For a job that pays how much?
Yeah. It came from PACs, from
Right.
Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz put in $28 million.
How crazy is that? Because like, what does Senate? What does it pay being a senator?
You have paid being a senator?
Yeah.
It's $174. Can I talk about this?
Please.
I don't understand why, you know, some incredibly wealthy dudes will spend tens and tens of millions of dollars just to get that. And I try to tell people there's no glamour here. And I just talked about that in an interview.
Do you think he wanted to become president, and this was like a step to being president?
I guess everybody wants the Iron Throne, but it's really not. But it's a different kinds of skills, and it really doesn't transfer over very well on that. But right now in Pennsylvania, David McCormick, a Connecticut man, he's running in Pennsylvania, and he lives in Connecticut, and he's incredibly wealthy. I think he's worth $300 or $400 million, and he's running the same race in Wisconsin. They're dropping. That's an important conversation. That the real problem in American politics for me is Citizens United and unlimited money. When they decided that money is speech, and now that turns the whole thing incredibly damaging. Right now, there's been at least more than $500 million on the table in Pennsylvania just for president. Not just the Senate races and other House seats. And I was the most, at least at that point, was the most expensive Senate race in history. And it was over $330 million for that one seat. And all of those dollars, they're spent to destroy and tear you apart. And then Fox News, I was their top target for 4 months. And social media, and I stayed out of that. I didn't enjoy it, but social media, all the conservative influencers, everything, and it just tore me apart. And at that point, at the end of September, it was, I couldn't get away from it, and it really is like, until you've had $100 million to destroy you, it's a next level kind of thing. And then everyone they were saying, well, he's a vegetable, you know, he's a retard, or he's lost his brain, and all kinds of things. And then that wasn't true. But the kinds of terrible things and those kinds of very personal things, and it just got incredibly ugly in a way.
Well, yeah, that has got to be a terrible experience to realize that there's so much money being spent just to attack you, and that you're a part of this very, very large and corrupt machine that's going after you just because they want to control the state. And it's a giant swing state, of course.
Yeah, the Senate, the whole Senate.
Yeah.
The whole Senate was. In fact, we actually flipped that seat. And that's the first time, I think, in the 40s or 50s that we've had two Democratic senators in Pennsylvania. Usually it's been a Dem and a Republican. And now, because we flipped that seat, it's mathematically, it's possible to retain the majority in the Senate. But it's going to be still fairly difficult because we have Montana, very, very red state, obviously. And that's really what the Republicans have put a significant bet to make sure that they can flip Montana. And then if Montana falls, then they're going to keep the majority, or they're going to get the majority, unless there's like a really surprise one. But that it may be more kind of difficult.
Do you think that money is the biggest problem in American politics? This ability to spend insane amounts of money?
Yeah. I mean, just imagine
Helicopter, distance 110 meters.
You're going to put a movie, and Orion Studio has $100 million to tell America that movie sucks. You know, that's shit. And it just, there's always going to be unlimited money because it's all about the control of the Senate or the House or the presidency. And when money is speech, it's going to be unlimited. And what happens is like, well, that's TV and on social, and it's going to be how can I destroy and
Right side.
that's individual, and that's where it is, and it gets incredibly personal, and it has an impact. I mean, that certainly it has for me. And until we have unlimited money, it's going to get more and more needy, personal, and expensive. And if you look at the billions of dollars that's spent, what we could have done for our society, the kinds of rails that we could build, and other things, if we didn't spend all those money to tear each
170
other
meters.
apart.
Yeah, it's very strange, and it sets a terrible tone for the rest of the country. Because these races, even though when they're over, people go back to a certain level of civility, it's already been established that this is on the table. These personal attacks, this evil, vicious propaganda, taking things out of context, conflating people's words.
The enemy is taking significant
have,
losses.
you take a quote, take it out of context, get that shit, put $10 million behind that, and that's in front of, millions of eyeballs right there spontaneously. And it's directly right at you, and it's unlimited money. I mean, when you look back on this race, it's like you are going to be stunned just how much money is put in that, how crazy those ads are, and just you can't get away from it. Like Montana has I think 600,000 or 700,000 voters, and they've dropped $250 million. I don't know how you can even spend $250 million in Montana. It's like if you have $100,000 in cash, you have to pay that in
$130 meters.
I don't know how they do that, but I promise you everybody in Pennsylvania or in any of these kinds of contested states, you just can't get away from that shit. And at this point, they just stop paying attention to it. It's noise. It's toxic kinds of noise.
And it does. It sets a tone for the whole country that we're willing to engage in this way.
Oh yeah, no, it's like that's the thing. It turns everything into a knife fights or worse. And it is about trying to destroy that person and convince other people that you are the worst thing in the world. You're a Marxist, you're a communist, or you're just all kinds of things. And it's the lowest denominator. And if you really want to fix American politics, I mean, there are issues, but I promise you, if you removed that, that would be a dramatic kinds of thing. And we all have to play that game. Some of us, like myself, I got a lot more of my money from small dollar donations, like Bernie. Bernie, I know he's been on the show. Bernie. But then other ones, it's like everyone chases the bigger checks. It's undeniable there too. And it's so disingenuous, and there's PACs and there's other kinds of organizations. One way or another, it's just the way to funnel tens of millions of dollars to just tear someone apart.
What was your background before you got into politics?
I was a social worker, and I came to a very deeply broken and fractured community, and I actually started helping young men and women get their GEDs and just kind of getting their lives back on track in that sense. And then that's why I did that for several years, and then I decided I wanted to run for mayor of a small town, and we had problems with inequality in a community that had 90% of the population abandoned the community and left. And if anyone's aware of the U.S. Steel, I mean, I live right now across the street from that iconic steel mill. I mean, that's really, that used to be America's Silicon Valley. Like about half of the world's steel used to be manufactured there. But now so much has changed. And then I ran for mayor and a small town mayor. And then that turned into, well, I decided like the kinds of issues that were meaningful to me and the personal kinds of experiences, I just thought, hey, I want to project my kinds of experiences and my values. And I started, I ran for the first time in 2016. I ran for the Senate. I mean, that's pretty kind of strange that you have a small town mayor running for the United States Senate. And, but I mean, we had no money. I mean, zero money on that. But we had a really like grassroots kind of a thing, and we got out across Pennsylvania, and we came up a little short, but we pulled in 20% of the votes, which that was pretty. People thought that was pretty remarkable, and I carried my home county, which is Allegheny. That's the second largest, and that really kind of set the stage to run for lieutenant governor a couple years later after 2016. But 2016, though, that was where America met Donald Trump. And I was early, turning the alarm off, saying, hey, we have to be concerned here. Like, Trump has connected with people in ways that it's like we have to be concerned. And I'll never forget, it was June in 2016, and I was a surrogate for Clinton, and Trump announced, hey, I'm showing up in a town called Menneson, which is a small steel town in the valley. March. I'm like, why is he showing up in? I mean, that's not. So either he's crazy or they plugged into something, and like I have to see that. So I tried to get into that just to kind of see what was going on. But they recognized me and they said, yeah, get the fuck out.
But you're hard to hide.
Yeah.
Hostile vehicle spotted, 300 meters.
They figured out that they have to connect, and to make that kind of an argument, to go to these kind of places, and it resonated, and you started to see a lot of the signs and a lot of the energy, and it's like, hey, there's a problem, and the Clinton campaign, everybody assumed that she was going to run away with it, and they made the mistake of just showing up in Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh, and assuming they were going to be okay, but a lot had slipped, and now the margins, Trump created margins that were unheard. We referred to them as Romney margins. So in other words, you have red counties, and Romney would cover those by about 60 to 65%. And Trump did. He created 80s. We were losing 80-20. And like, well, yeah, that's a small county, but yeah, you multiply that by 57 other counties, and that's how they scale up, and that's how he won. And he won by 45,000 votes, and that's why he captured the blue wall, and that made him president. And here we are right now. The blue wall is, they're both fighting on the blue wall, and the blue wall is Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan.
When you were running during 2016, what were you trying to accomplish? Like, what did you want to do that you felt like you could uniquely provide a service for?
Well, it wasn't. I just think it was just different. I'm like, hey, I was running for about forgotten places, people where America's turned their backs on that, and talking about those kinds of important issues like living wage, abandoning the industrial parts of America. Some people watching what things have been left behind in places like Braddock. It's astonishing. 90% of people left, and 90% of the buildings are gone, and that whole region has just been thrown away. So I just wanted to, and I didn't. There was a path. I mean, there were two other people in the primary. And I thought I could maybe split. I could split the other two and just sneak by and get 33% plus one extra vote. But I came up a little short because I had no money, because it's always going to be about money. And then Katie McGinty, she won, but she lost. And then that was that same cycle. And then the same year that Trump won.
And so, since you've gotten into the Senate, what meaningful change have you been able to accomplish there?
Well, again, you're a freshman, and my colleague, one that was just here, Senator Vance. I mean, we were both in the same cycle. We both ran in 22, so we both there for less than 2 years. And it's really based on seniority. And it's just kind of like, hey, get on the end of that. You know, so you are a freshman, and it's, you know, your influence is, you know, at least in the institution are limited in some sense. But if you have a bigger platform, and I did, and I try to have those kinds of impacts in this conversation. But my first half of that first year, that was a little, took a different detour because, you know, I was dealing with depression. I was at depression, and I realized that I was in a bad place. So having those kind of choices, I found myself in Walter Reed to get help because of depression, and so I think it's an important conversation. And I thought at that time it could be politically difficult, but I thought it was important. You know, that must be something politically. I'm okay. So that's why I'm continuing. So how the impact I've had, I never fully expected that voice would break through. And I'm in contact with people constantly saying thank you for talking about this. I chose to get help, or I chose not to follow that path on self-harm. And so I've had active conversations with a member of Congress or fathers with younger kids, and they're like, hey, can you please talk? And I do that. I'm happy to talk to anybody. And so that's a way I've had an impact through it, all of that. And also my voice through, after what happened on 10/7, October 7th. And I decided I was going to be a very consistent voice for Israel through that. So that's why kind of like the platform, but in terms of if anyone's being honest, whether it was Senator Vance or any kinds of freshman senators, it's very limited because otherwise there's people that have been there for 25, 30 years. They're the ones that are going to be the chairman. And if you're a minority party, you have incredibly limited responsibility to move or
So the depression thing, I think, is very important that we talk about that. I think transparency is something that people really appreciate. So many people suffer from depression. It's such a normal part of being a human being. And for a guy like you, who's a senator, who's already gone through being attacked, already gone through all of these horrible things that they said about you while you're recovering from a stroke, it takes a lot of courage to come out and discuss that. I think it's really important. I'm really glad you did it.
Well, I don't. Well, thank you, but I don't think it was really courage. It's like I only had a choice.
But it is courage because you know you're going to be publicly attacked, and it's a vulnerable point. But I think it's not, because I think so many people suffer from it. I think there's courage in coming out and talking about it openly and realizing that people are going to use it as an attack vector and saying, you know what, this is important to talk about. This is important to acknowledge and to show people that you can recover from something like that.
Well, originally I was just going to talk about depression. And there's a paradox. You know, you might be a place in your life that you've actually kind of won, but depression lies to you and it convinces you that you've lost. And my depression got far more worse after I won, and then it was a downward spiral. And then if you don't check your depression, then you go down a dangerous slope about self-harm. And I got to occupy that kind of a dark place. And that's when I realized that I have a choice. It's like if I don't address this, then I had an emergency brake. You know, it's like I have to stop. I have to, and that was my kids. I'm like I can't be the example. And when you're going to get older in life and you're going to have those kinds of challenges, well, hey, Dad decided to leave. Oh, that must be the right thing. And I'm like, I cannot allow myself to be the example for that. So I stayed in the game, and I was able to get help, and I got much better. So like for me, it's like I originally didn't want to talk about self-harm because that's definitely not a great political winner.
Right.
But I was like, I have to be answered. I have to be honest about that and honest. And people, that really resonated with people. I think I was the first politician, especially at that level, talking about self-harm. And you know, if people are that are suffering, people that, I mean, you have a huge audience. I'm willing to bet plenty of them are suffering from that or looking through those kinds of issues.
No doubt.
Yeah, and I promise people, whatever your path is for recovery, and I'm not an expert, but if you promise yourself to stay in that game, that you already, you know, you're almost guaranteed to get better, because I promise you it will get better. And I was at the point where I was really, you know, in a very dark place, and I stayed in that game, and I am staying in front of you right now and having this conversation. And so that's what I try to tell everybody, whether they're listening today or in other times when I've had that. It's an honest conversation, but it is a red and blue conversation, and it's a rural and urban or suburban conversation. It's men or women or even younger kids. I've had conversations with teenagers, you know, with their parents, and they've even tried to take their lives. And I can't think of anything much more tragic than, especially a young person, taking their lives over some of the things that I never thought that voice would penetrate, but it did, and that's why I'm willing to have that conversation.
Well, apparently it's very common for people that undergo major surgery to have depression afterwards, and there's a bunch of physiological reasons for that, they believe. My friend Dr. Mark Gordon, who's done a lot of work on traumatic brain injuries and depression amongst athletes and soldiers, he did a lot of research on that, and one of the things that they found is that people that undergo like a long period of anesthesia and either heart surgery or any kind of major surgery, there's a disruption of your endocrine system afterwards that leads people to be just weary and broken down. And I could imagine that, along with the Senate race and all the other chaos and all the stresses involved with that, it plays a significant factor.
Well, I'm sure it must have been a factor. I discovered that I had two friends. They're roughly my age, and they had young kids, and they took their lives. And they were both in the media, and one worked for an incredibly elite organization, and another one had a really strong position. One had a heart attack, and the other one had a stroke years earlier, and I found out. And I wish I could have talked to them, and I did talk to them, but it doesn't mean they were weak or that they gave up. It's just I got lucky, and I found my emergency brake. And if you have any kinds of study on people and self-harm, there was an individual, he jumped off the Golden Gate, and he survived. And immediately after he says, as he crossed over the rail, I want to live, I want to live. I've made a terrible mistake. And you hit the water going 75 miles an hour, and it's very against the chance of surviving, but you did. And now he became obsessed with this idea. He looked out for everyone that survived, and about 45 people out of 1,800 people that have jumped over, they survived, and it was unanimously people immediately like, oh my God, I want to live, I want to live. And not one single person thought, well, I wish I was more successful. So, like, I try to put that forward, and I can't imagine how difficult, because they had children the same age mine, and trying to explain to a 10-year-old son, like, why did Daddy leave? And those are dark conversations, and it's not about weakness. It's about trying to get away from that. People that are suffering from depression, if anyone's been there, it's like their mind is on fire, and you just want to get away from it. Please, I need relief from that kind of thing. And every now and then you have kind of like the eye of the hurricane, where you finally thought maybe things could get better, but it roars back in, and it's like you get back to that very dark place. And I just tell everybody, I'm begging you, stay in that game. I promise you it can get better. And the depression is lying to you. It is absolutely lying to you. And don't make the kind of choice that you can't come back from.
I have a friend who jumped off the bridge, died that way. Yeah, it's a terrible thing to find out. you always feel like you could have talked to him, you could have helped. You always feel like, I didn't know he was suffering. And then I found out that he died a few days later, and it was just like, it just leaves you feeling so lost. It's such a terrible way to go, too, that bridge. God, how many people, like, would you say how many people have jumped off that bridge, the Golden Gate?
I think that they reference about over 1,800 people. And a small, tiny survived. And really being faced that idea that you're not going to come back, it's like spontaneously curative. Like, oh my God, I want to live. Like it was unanimous. And that's such an important kind of research that we did. And it's like, and again, that's my message. It has to be very simple. Stay in that game. It's like you can't do this. You can't do this.
And you need support.
Yeah. You need support, whatever that is. And some people have different kinds of resources. I mean, I would want that for everybody, the resources that I have. But that's not fair. It's not fair. And I got lucky. Not because I'm so much strong or better. But no, I just got lucky. And I promise you, you're not going to regret staying in the game. And you can get better. And that is probably, I think, in my opinion, that's about 75% of getting back better.
What have you done to help? What has helped you?
My family. That's really what every person needs to have like that emergency, like an emergency brake. It's like, you're out of control. You're having the darkest conversation you'll have with yourself, and you have to have something to stop that. Otherwise, you're going to go over the edge. And everyone needs to have that, whatever that is, whether it's your family, whether it's your wife or your husband, whether it is, or that there has to be it has to get better. It's going to get better. That's why I say stay on the game. And I'm not an expert. I'm not trained in that. But when people reach out to me and say, well, I feel like this, and I'm like, hey, it's like, health works. I promise you it will get better. And I can't guarantee what your path will be. But what I can say is that stay in that game, and you are going to find your way on that path. And you're never going to regret. It's like, the finality of that. And something, you can make a bad choice, and that might set you back in life, but that's the one choice you can't come back from, and you will leave people in your life that will never understand, or you wish you could reach back and you could let them know, and stay away from that kind of blackness, because I promise you would regret, and if you can't come back.
So what has helped you? Counseling, medication, like what are the things that got you back on track other than just your family?
The election and everything, I was convinced that I've lost everything. I had it's difficult to fully speak, and my kids, they got pulled into the social media kinds of invective. And I've destroyed my health. And now against odds, I won. And now, am I going to be able to do this job? And would I have been better off if I didn't survive? And I got to that kind of a dark place, but. And then I just had this that spontaneous where it's like my kids, it's like no, I love you. It's like, oh my gosh, it's like when they were visiting, I didn't want them to visit me at Walter Reed. I was like, why would they want to be around this?
Right.
But they did, and it was like this kind of spontaneous kinds of love, and it just was like a shot. And it's just like, I can come back. I thought, it's like, well, why would they want this mess back? And then just working through a lot of those things and other kinds of techniques and things. It was like, but that was probably the single most transformative event where it's like I realized that I can come back to my life. Otherwise, it's like I thought I've lost everything. Would I be able to even do my job? And it's like, do I even have a career? I mean, I'm talking about that was a significant national story when after I signed myself in, and that pulled my kids in through that. I mean, this idea, after we announced that we're signing in, and there were news trucks outside their house, and they had the trauma of thinking that Dad could have lost after the stroke, and now it's put them through so much. And that's why I was convinced that they probably don't want me around. And then I made the stupid mistake of I went on social media and things. I'm like, and just I read shit. I mean, it's just no, my God, millions and millions of views in videos, and it's just like, going after my family and saying, hey, he's a vegetable, he's a retard. And sling blade and all kinds of things, and it wasn't the individual kinds of insults, it was the volume and just how widespread it was. And I'm like, who jumps online to go after a stranger that's never really done anything to you personally?
Well, I think it's not just individuals. I think it's targeting. I think there's a lot of that stuff, especially when there's something that is significant as a Senate seat. And I think there's,
I mean, it's like if I have $100 million to convince you you're a terrible person and you're the worst thing ever, and that inspires a lot of people, and hey, that's the mission. It's like he must be those things, and we're now there's no tap out. There is no tap out. It's like even after I won, in some sense, it actually accelerated.
Right. It's not the war's not over. It's just begun.
No. Oh no. And the second you step into that kind of arena on the federal level for like a Senate seat, if it's like a purple state like Pennsylvania, I promise you there will be tens and tens of millions of dollars, and their mission is to turn you into the worst thing in the world, and whoever survives, that's the one that's going to be in that seat. And I still will never understand why someone, independently wealthy kinds of people will spend incredible amounts of money. And I try people, I'm like, there's no glamour here. I'm in a 500 square foot apartment, and I'm like here with my phone. I'm like, hey, Grubhub, what's this tonight? And then it's like I watch TV on Netflix and things, and I ask my colleagues. I'm like, hey, is there kind of secret society like crazy parties or sitting around with cigars and this and like, well, no, I kind of have the same version of that.
That's the perception, though, right? The perception is
the perception is
invited into a club.
Yeah,
now you control the world.
Yeah, that we all have witty kinds of dialogue on West Wing. Like talking like kinds of turn. And really, it's just like, and I describe that as a lot of it's just bad. It's just bad performance art. Yeah, thanks. That's usually what it is. It's just bad performance art. And some people, like if you're in a safe state or a safe seat, and especially if you have the resources and they're incredibly wealthy people, they buy a house and they move their life there, so you're able to kind of things. But I don't have those resources, and I'm in a very, very the ultimate purple, and so I spend more than 50% of my time away, and I miss my kids. It's rough for that. I mean, I signed up for that, but I promise you, there's no glamour in that.
Well, there's certainly no glamour if you're honest, but I think there's a lot of people that look to certain members of the government that have jobs that pay $150,000, $170,000 a year, but somehow or another acquire hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of their career, usually through some kind of insider trading.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, I don't own any of those stocks or anything, and definitely, like, if you have any kinds of impact or you know that there's something civic is coming.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's like you need.
How is that legal?
It's well, no, we should have the kind of legislation to make sure that you're not, like, if you are on Congress, you shouldn't have any kinds of stocks because you are going to be passing kinds of laws, et cetera, that you know, you have to separate that. It really shouldn't be a part of that kinds of a thing. And I mean, I'm all out. I'm open. All of us, we have to have our wealth and our, you know, all that. And if I'm not the poorest, I have probably the bottom 5. And, you know, other people there are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So, you know, we can't have that situation where, you know, if you're going to be involved on those kinds of legislation, that you can't be enriched by those kinds of, and there has to be some kind of influence.
That seems simple. That seems like logical. Like most people would agree to that.
Yeah, there's a lot of inertia. It's the same thing. I think if any one of us were being honest, money is destroying our democracy, and that's that. Some people that might sound trite,
No.
or it's a cliche, but it's 100% though.
I think
100%.
most people who
Yeah.
are objective would agree with you.
I promise you, it is absolute. It is a scourge of American democracy, and money is king. And what's that money for? That money is for tearing you apart, and that creates more and more kinds of incivility and cruelty. And then now, well, when I was in graduate school for that stuff, I mean, there was no social media, and there wasn't, there wasn't podcasts, there wasn't all kinds of things, so that made it more difficult. But now there's all of those things, and social media is an accelerant, and just unlimited money, and that has what, like, I'm sure you're an athlete, and if you've heard that NFL players, it's like, wait, would you want your son to play? And sometimes say, well, no, I wouldn't want that for my son. And it's like, I'm relieved that my oldest is like, he has no interest in being in politics and that. So I can't imagine it's going to get better until, we address this idea that unlimited money is unlimited attack, and it's unlimited cruelty and hyperbole, and just all kinds of poisoning the well that, half of us are going to hate your guts, and the other half, hey, that's my team.
Yeah.
So,
well, I strongly feel that the internet should remain the way it is in terms of people being able to post on social media anonymously if they so choose. But the problem with that is it can be captured by money, and it can be captured by these enormous groups that have bot farms, whether it's state actors, whether it's other countries, other nations that are doing that to try to attack our system and to try to promote certain narratives, or whether it's our own country itself doing it, because I think we do it too. And I think that PACs do it, and it's just
people hook themselves up. It's like you self-select your cocoon.
Yes.
And like I'm a big fan of Apple News, and it's like $13 a month, but I read everything across the spectrum. Very, very left and very, very right in between. And I think it's really, I think that's your responsibility, especially if you're an elected leader, to be challenged, to challenge yourself on the ideas. And it's like, clearly one side doesn't have all the answers, and the other side can't be 100% wrong. And it's just like being challenging and living or taking in other kinds of perspectives. I think that's a responsibility, because otherwise, if you only just cocoon yourself into, and it turns into a gigantic circle jerk, and that's why it just turns people to just kind of dig in, and it's like, hey, the problem is them, and we have to.
Well, it's a problem with human beings in general. So we tend to be very tribal, and we tend to commit to an ideology whether it's comfortable. Yes,
Comfortable.
Sure. Especially when you're in an echo chamber. Everyone's agreeing with you. You get social credit from saying the things that these people all agree with, and you feed off that. But it's when it's being captured by, it's not just these people exchanging ideas. It's also a bunch of people that are manipulating people's ideas. I don't know if you've ever paid attention to Renee DeResta's work with the Internet Research Agency. What they uncovered what they were doing was using, this was like during the 2016 election, using social media, and it was a lot of Russian troll farms and troll farms in other countries.
It's possible, but to be honest, that election wasn't turned on, I think, Russian.
No.
What happened in 2016 was he plugged into like kinds of an energy, or like he was just like kind of looking to make that kind of a connection there.
Well, he's a legitimate outsider. This is the appeal. The appeal is that people think that this system is completely rigged and it's captured by money and special interests and enormous corporations, and that here's a guy who's outside of this system completely, and the evidence of that is how the system turned against him, and how you got to see people on television every night talking about Russiagate, talking about how he's a puppet of Putin, talking about the Steele dossier, talking about all these different things that turned out to not be true, and it further
I never bought into some of that kind of stuff, because if anyone that spent any time on the ground in one of those states, it's very clear that wasn't because of some small kinds of tweets and things like whatever. It's undeniable, and also remember, like he was the Republican Party was like, hey, this is a joke, and I remember Jeb Bush, and he had like $100 or $200 million, and he just went by, he ticked him off, and even then people thought he was going to win, but he did. But remember though, overall though, that was 75,000 votes. Mathematically, like, when you think of that, 160 million votes, 75,000 spread across 3 large states, like including my own. That transformed American politics and in the world as well, and it just came down to 75,000 voters in those 3 states, and that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary time in that regard, right? I mean, it's uncharted territory.
Well, I referenced a movie a bit ago, Bulwark. Bulwark, and it was Warren Beatty, and he was a senator, and he kind of had like a breakdown. He started saying provocative things. He used to get up in front of his audience and kind of like let the gas.
Target mark. Distance 250 meters.
And it was kind of like, it was an absurd. I mean, when I was in grad school, that was like put up as like, well, heck, I mean, people enjoyed that, and now that became a term in politics saying, oh, we, in fact, even President Obama was like, hey, we all want to really go full Bulwark. And but that's what really he channeled it there. He would say, kind of like he projects kind of like, well, I don't care, and just say all this kind of thing, and people have responded to those kinds of things, and that, a lot of people think that's the bug. But you have to understand that for enough people, that's the feature.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what they want. And whatever that is, if it describes a brand, it's not, I don't admire that, but you still have to kind of marvel at the level to say crazy kinds of things that well, I guess maybe we're old enough to remember when in the George Bush, Al Gore, he is like, oh, God, this guy. And that moved the polls. People were like, he rolled his eyes at Bush, like things. And like it used to be much more staid. And now, think of what's been said now,
right,
and all this stuff. And I don't think people aren't paying attention to some of the, whatever the latest outrage is.
Yeah, it's, I think one of your appeals is that you speak like a normal human being. You speak like a person who actually cares about these issues, and you seemingly speak from the heart. You don't seem polished, which is a good thing. And I think people.
I wish I was more handsome.
I don't think
yeah,
that's.
No,
I don't think that's good.
No. I know. It's like I'm honest.
Yeah.
I'm honest. I think I'm in touch with what I'm limited. I wasn't blessed with model looks, and
but it's not looks. It's the polish of speaking like a congressman, like a senator, like a presidential candidate.
Yeah,
but it's this kind of bullshit way of communicating that's inauthentic, that even though it's effective, even though it's polished and smooth, people never get a sense of who that person is as a human being. Trump is not polished. He's not polished in that sense, but you get a sense of who he is as a human being. There doesn't seem to be a veil. There doesn't seem to be this disconnect between a human being and the thoughts. You might not agree with him, you might think he's crass or rude, but at least you know that he's the guy that's talking. These are his thoughts, and people trust that way more than they trust someone who's, polished but full of shit.
Yeah, no, it's that Scarface. It's like, word and balls.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna, and that's, you're losing politically if you're telling people to not believe what their eyes. Like these kinds of issues, and it's like, I'm not going to lie, or I'm not going to toe a line if I don't believe in that. But in terms of the conversation, I think it's all I've got, and it's not because I don't care. It's actually, I'm very committed, and I really do care. But I think people are like, I think authenticity. That's one of the last meaningful currencies in this shitty business.
So I was having a conversation this morning with a friend of mine, and we were talking about voter ID, and he was shocked that you don't need voter ID in, I believe it's 15 states. 15 states require no ID. 24 or 25 states require ID, but only, I think, 11 of them require you to have photo ID. This is a weird one in this election that I've tried to look at as objectively as possible, and I can't see any reason why you would not need ID to vote unless you wanted people to vote that aren't qualified to vote.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, I would like to remind everybody, and it's not like a talking point. It's actually it's in a fact that the voter fraud is incredibly rare. It's really hard to get away with that successfully. And in 2020,
at scale, you mean?
Yeah, it's not scalable. Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's like, and usually it's kind of local kinds of communities, and people either know that person or it's not. It's never going to be organized where you can pack a box where you can determine that kind of thing. It's just that after election, it's just never been. In 2020, out of over millions of votes in 2020 in Pennsylvania, there were 5 or 6 ones. And what happened is that they turned out to be the Republicans, and they used their deceased, their dead moms, to vote for Trump through that. And that was documented, and they were caught, they were charged, they were convicted, and all those votes, that would have been 6 votes out of all of it. So
do you think that that's the only voter fraud that exists?
Well, people also, we need to remind that, the voter database, there are cross-checks against deaths. And, who's moved or what's their status are. All that's cross-checked back and forth. So it's a living kinds of thing where it's continually updated and all of those kinds of things. And it self-checks. And remember also, in 2020, Trump, there was like, there's cheating, there's all these things are happening. And remember, there's probably 57, 58 red counties. And all of those commissioners that are in charge of that, they were like, hey, no, there was none. And even in Georgia, Governor Kemp, like, hey, Georgia, it was very close, but it was honest. There was no kinds of fraud in that. And that's a Republican.
But other than making things a little bit easier to cheat, what would be the logic behind not having voter ID? I've tried to look at this as objectively as possible. I can't find any reason why you would not require someone to be able to prove that they're the person they say they are when they put in their ballot.
It's not a hill that I'm saying we have to die on that.
But it's a vulnerability, clearly, right?
Well, these kinds of communities, ones that I live in, for some people they're not gonna they don't have an ID necessarily, or they've lost it or whatever, and
But you need one to get a driver's license. You need one to get a
or
passport.
they don't have it. They don't want,
230
yeah,
meters.
they would have to get an ID, or it costs X amount of dollars, or this kind of thing. It's a barrier, and it usually tends to skew more towards people that are coming from those kinds of communities, and the Republicans understand that they're usually going to skew towards Democratic voters through that, so that's kind of the argument. On that, and there's never been any evidence that there is widespread kinds of voter fraud,
Target mark,
and that's
200
We really
meters.
didn't have widespread mail-in ballots to the extent that it was done in 2020. We really didn't have that
all
before.
of those were. And, there's 5 or 6 dead moms that were voting. Those were all. Well, actually, one guy went in, he voted, and then he went up to his car and he put on sunglasses and a bobcat, and he walked in. He's like, "Hi, hello, I'm here to vote." And the guy's like, "You were just here. What are you doing?"
Marking enemy tank,
And
250
then
meters.
he was trying to double vote.
Did you see the story about the Chinese national who was arrested because he voted and then he tried to get his ballot back, and that's how they caught him?
It's possible.
Yeah, this is thing that just happened, and unfortunately, once he's voted, even though he was not eligible to vote, his vote is going to count. Texas removed there's lawsuits about it, but Texas removed somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 million people that were ineligible to vote, that could have been voting.
Well, everybody knows who's voting and who's not voting. And then
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by everybody knows?
Well, and remember also too, Dominion. People on the Trump side, they all said that Dominion was corrupt, and that cost Fox $800 million. They had to pay $800 million about defamation for saying that it was rigged, or if it's not, and there was no evidence, and they had to just acknowledge that this was the honest thing. So,
But Dominion is it's a computer program, right? It's a computer. Like that's what you do. You're doing electronic voting.
yeah, that was a system that mostly and often it was red states that were using those.
Do you remember? Well, that is true. Because do you remember the documentary Hacking Democracy? Did you ever see that?
Again, there's always going to be people that are going to try to have an influence on it.
Right. But did you see that documentary? It was about the Republicans doing it.
I haven't seen that
It was a
documentary.
documentary during the Bush administration, and one that they showed that the Diebold machines, when Diebold was a significant contributor, I believe, to the Republican Party, they showed in the documentary that you could use a third-party input to change the results. And they actually proved it in the documentary, and people were pointing to this as, oh my God, the Republicans are cheating, and the Republicans have used this to try to rig the election for George Bush. It was an HBO documentary.
I'm not accusing. I've never accused the Republicans. In 2016.
No, I'm not saying you did. What I'm trying to say is that this is not a thing that's only been leveled against the Democrats. This is not like an accusation that only applies to Democrats. In the past, the similar accusation was applied to Republicans.
Yeah, well, I think we can all agree that we need to have just like our border, we need a secure border, and we need an absolutely secure voting system as well too. I mean, that should never be considered controversial.
Right.
And in 2016, a lot of Democrats were outraged that
The enemy
we
holds the
lost.
majority of
But I never claimed that there was, the Republicans cheated or do all those kinds of things. And it's like, the problem for accusing that there was voter fraud is that if you don't like the outcome,
Right.
so, and I have never witnessed an election if they've won that they claim, well, there might be, we might have
cheated.
Yeah, no, we're not cheating. So
Right,
so
of
I
course.
think that's kind of I think that's kind of the underlying truth about that. And of course, I think I was first Democrat saying, hey, we need a secure border. It's a significant issue. And if I thought there was any kinds of issues, and I've been very vigilant thread. I've been actively involved in those kinds of things, and I've never witnessed those kinds of a thing.
But what do you mean by issues? Like, what kind of issues are you talking about? You talking about people letting people in order to get votes?
Well, it's not. There's not that level kinds. I don't think there's that level kinds of organization.
But there is an organization that's moving these people to swing states.
Tango.
There's a significant number of these people that are illegal immigrants that have made their way to swing states. And then there's been calls for amnesty. There's been calls for allowing these people to have a pathway to citizenship and allow them to vote. The fear that a lot of people have is that this is a coordinated effort to take these people that you're allowing to come into the country, then you're providing them with all sorts of services like food stamps and housing and setting them up, and then providing a pathway to amnesty, and then you would have voters that would be significantly voting towards the Democrats because they're the people that enabled them to come into the country in the first place and provided them with those services. This is a big fear that people have, and that you're rigging this system and that this will turn all these states into essentially locked blue like California is.
Well, you know, it's what immigration is always going to be a tough issue in our nation. You know, I had as a professor in grad school, Alan Simpson, and he was a United States senator. He was Wyoming. And he was actually a pro-choice Republican. I mean, how rare that would be. Well, it doesn't exist now. And he said, you are never going to have any meaningful immigration kinds of legislation. He's like, because both sides, that's useful for them, and it's going to be back and forth. And he said that 25 years ago.
Useful meaning the debate, having it always some political
it's
talking
useful for one side or the other. It's useful. And he said there were never going to be. And he said that in 1999. And I voted for the border deal, and that went down. And that's, I mean, he said that 25 years ago, and that was absolutely true now, that they had an opportunity to do a comprehensive border, bipartisan, and that went down because Trump, he declared that's a bad deal after it was negotiated with the other side.
But didn't that deal also involve amnesty, and didn't that deal also involve a significant number of illegal aliens being allowed into the country every year? I think it was 2 million people. So it was still the same sort of situation, and their fear is exactly what I talked about, that these people will be moved to swing states, and that will be used to essentially rig those states and turn them blue forever.
Well, I'm not really sure if that's what's in play. I think it's really it's important that we have an honest conversation.
But doesn't that seem logical, though? If you have a significant number of people that are being moved into swing states that have come across the border illegally, and then you provided them with all these services, you provided them with food stamps, EBT, you provided them with housing. You could, if you gave those people amnesty and allowed those people to vote, and it was very organized, you're talking about 75,000 votes over a few counties that switched everything over to the Republicans. You could see how you import 10 million people over the course of 4 years illegally, and then move a significant number of them to swing states, and then provide them with all these services, and then give them a path to citizenship. You could essentially rig those states.
Undeniably, immigration is changing our nation. I mean, I haven't spent a lot of time in Texas, but it's very clear that immigration has made Texas, and I think it's generally for a good thing. And like my wife's Brazilian, and her family was documented, and she was 7 years old when she was brought. And I'm the big pro-immigration guy that there was, but it also has to be true that we need a secure border, and we have to work this out, because we are pretending that you have millions and millions of people, living in the shadow, and they are here, and we have to work together and figure out a way to get forward because they're here, and it seems incredibly a difficult kind of logistics thing, and I think it's also un-American to round everybody up, and really the vast majority of them are just living legal lives and doing a lot of the jobs that other people here would never do.
J.D. Vance actually talked about that the other day when he was here. He was explaining how there are CEOs of large corporations that want these people to come across because they need cheap labor. And the way to get cheap labor is have people that are illegals working for less than what would be our minimum wage.
Well, I'm not aware. I mean, minimum wage really. I think it's most incredibly difficult and violent kind of jobs, like and that's meat.
Jobs that a lot of people don't want to work.
A lot of those are kind of really rough.
Meat processing, construction.
Very rough.
Right. And this is the thing that's been said about Springfield, Ohio, that these Haitians that have moved to Springfield, Ohio, there's people are complaining about them, but the people that have employed these people are saying, listen, these people are taking jobs that other people that lived in this community don't want. They work very hard and they're very happy that they have this pathway to be in America now. I think most people that come here because they want a better life for their families. And America is essentially a country that was founded by immigration. I'm a grandchild of immigrants. I'm here because of immigration. This is an immigrant country essentially.
Yeah, and it's like it's again, and like the Haitians, that they're referencing in Ohio and Springfield. I mean, they're not eating dogs, they're not eating pets in those countries. Now, it's reasonable. I mean, I've said the same thing, that we have to have a secure border, but it didn't even apply to that situation. That was all a legal situation. That was enmity. And that's because Haiti was
terrible.
Terrible situation. And to me, they were doing those jobs, and Republicans, even the Republican governor was saying, like, these are good workers, and this is not the problem. They aren't eating geese. And it's just like, you can be very pro-border, like I am, or you can be very strict on immigration, but you don't have to demonize or try to turn a group of people in that they're eating your dog.
Well, they're eating ducks and eating. Look, I'm sure some people have done that. You know why I know that? Because some people do that in places that are just Americans. Ducks are edible, and some people want to eat a duck, and it's just like, you're not going to stop it. But that's not the major problem that people face. So this is the pro side of it, right? The pro side of it is you give a pathway to people that are from very unfortunate circumstances, and I think we would both agree that if we were living in those countries and there was a pathway to citizenship in the United States, all you had to do was make it across the border. We would both do it. It was better for our families. It was better for our future. If we were living in a place that had no hope and no future, and all you had to do is make it to America and you could work, we would all do it. I would do it. You would do it. I bet everybody listening to this would do it if they found themselves in that circumstance. That's the best aspect of it. The best aspect of it is good people that are ambitious, that want a better life, which is how this country was founded. The worst aspect of it is Venezuelan gangs that are taking over apartment buildings in Aurora, Colorado, and San Antonio, Texas. That's the worst aspect of it, is that they're letting in gang members. Venezuela's emptied out their prisons, and essentially, according to the president,
the Mario boat lift, the whole...
Right, what happened in Cuba. Yeah, the same kind of deal. Emptying out their prisons and instructing these people to make it to America. This is a significant problem with the open border.
Yeah, and that's why we need a secure border. And there's also, that all of this is about a truth, is that America is a beacon to the world. Millions of people. The demand to become a citizen here, or to participate in our amazing society, the demand outstrips the space there, and we're already the very pro-immigration. We allow more kinds of a path, more than any other nations in the world on that, and people are willing to die, and they put themselves at risk just to kind of get here, to be able to participate here. So America isn't the problem. America is one of the great hopes in the world, and that's why so many people want to come be a part of that, and that's why it has to have an effective border. And it's like, if we had a real issue here and we wanted to address that, and that's why my former professor said that you're never going to have the kind of a deal, because it is useful for both sides to weaponize that and to demonize one side or turn the other thing in there, because it's a serious, important issue.
It's a political talking point that they're always going to use. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, it's useful. I mean, it's weaponized.
It's time.
And that's why you have to have an honest conversation. And
Right.
That's the thing I've always, I was reaching out saying that was referred to HR 1, and that was like kind of like the dream kind of immigration law coming out of the House. And I was like, hey, if that border deal goes down, then it's like, hey, we should continue to have that conversation.
Right.
It's like they're parts of they're parts.
But what's contradictory is that, say if you're coming from Canada or Europe and you're a highly skilled, college-educated person who wants to live in America and become a United States citizen, the path to citizenship is incredibly difficult. It's hard. You have to go up for review. You have to show that you're doing something that Americans can't do. You have to be a person of significant talent or ability. There's something about you that we want you in here. Yet, if you just make it across the border and walk in, people want to give you amnesty. And they want to allow you a path to citizenship quickly without any of those hoops. You don't have to take tests. You don't have to go up for review. Not only that, but once you get here, once you apply for amnesty, there's a significant wait period where you're allowed to maintain your residence in this country between 7 and sometimes longer years.
We have to figure out what's the way.
Well, that's kind of crazy, though, isn't it?
The fact is, we have an issue. We have millions of people here, and the vast majority of them are living legal kinds of lives. And of
What
course,
would you do if you were the president? Let's imagine President Fetterman has to deal with this issue. You want to address the American people. What do you think should be done?
Again, having a conversation to the Congress and the American people like I'm having right now as well too. Like I think it's two things can be true at the same time. You can be very pro-immigration. I wouldn't have the beautiful family that I have if it wasn't for challenges and issues with immigration. But then we have to figure out a way that we can marry a successful way that we can combine. I think I personally do think immigration is really one of our secret weapons. I think that's what makes America so strong.
I agree with you.
Yeah, I think that's made it.
Ambitious people want a better life. That's literally how we're founded. That's what
Why people trying to live legally in India or Russia? Put some people in nations like that. I mean, in some
Contact
sense,
transport
weird way,
distance,
like
250 meters.
It's a significant but a good problem to have because
Taking
we're such
fire.
an amazing nation.
Yes.
Agreed.
Yeah.
But if I'm President Fetterman, I'm like, hey, we got to figure this out. We got to figure this out. I'm not
What would
gonna,
you
I'm not
do?
going to demonize. I'm not going to demonize the Republicans and say that you're xenophobic. The second you start calling somebody, oh, you're xenophobic, it's like within the conversation is going to shut down.
Right.
And I'm saying, it's like a serious conversation requires serious people. And the second, and this talk about unlimited money, and it's like suddenly you're like, I had a gigantic billboard saying Fetterman equals, open borders.
Look forward.
I was turned into,
Marxist.
all these things, and it's just like, and of course that was never true. And then when I had the opportunity, because as I'm a senator, and we have that kinds of legislation in front of me, I'm like, yes, we need to have a serious one. And now people are like, we're shocked. Well, wait a minute. I thought they told us that he was all like border in, open it up and whatever, and it's just not true.
Well, that's the problem with people building a fake narrative around your actual opinions. I think people have been shocked by you, and we've actually talked about it on the podcast over the last couple of years. Say very reasonable things, very reasonable, honest things.
Bring you to it.
I was thrilled to be here, and I've been working on band of years, and these are the times, parts of times we become too fragile. They're not allowed to talk about those things. They're not allowed to have these kinds of conversations. I never understood why that's really a problem. But it's like when people discover, it's like, well, hey, he's being kind of reasonable, or maybe I disagree with some things, but he's not what $100 million, trained me.
Right. The propaganda. So what do you think
No.
if you were President Fetterman? Let's bring it back to that. What would you do about the border? Like, how do you secure the border, but also allow a pathway for people to pursue
I would have started with the HR2, and there are elements that are just not palatable to. There are members of my colleagues that that come from more deep blue states, and that becomes it's unpalatable to some people. So
How do you secure the border? How would that be done?
We are moving
well,
to attack
I
Charlie
mean,
2.
it's got to have the best border deal is the only one that can pass.
Attack there,
And
40 meters from my position.
HR2 was described as like kind of like I joke, I call that the OnlyFans list of what Republicans want for immigration.
Why
The OnlyFans wish list, kind of like this is what we all want. It's like the OnlyFans. This is what we want. And that was never going to pass. That was never going to pass. That was like what every Republicans on the House, the hardliners, that's what it was. And they passed it because in this cycle, the Republicans have the majority in the House. And now they put that up. And that's never going to pass in the Senate because we have control. And then that kind of got
Troops just captured Sector Charlie.
sidelined. And then when everything kind of came together, and that was the aid for Ukraine, for Israel, and for China.
A lot of other stuff in there.
And then the Republicans tied the border to passing that. And there were some people that were frustrated, saying, "Hey, no, that's
Well, that's one of the more frustrating things about bills is that you can take a bill about an issue, say energy or whatever, immigration, and attach a bunch of other stuff like support for foreign aid, support for specific wars, or whatever it is. You could throw a bunch of stuff in there that really shouldn't be in there, and then you have these bills that are 2,000 pages long and no one's really reading.
I thought it was reasonable. I thought it was reasonable to have that conversation. Like, let's have a conversation.
Right.
I mean, because for me it was about security, and for that aid bill, that was for me, and I think that was our global war on arms.
Right.
Whether it's Ukraine, whether it's in Israel and China, and clearly what their intent for China is on Taiwan, and all of that's coming, and that's really what's under assault. It's undeniable that democracy is under attack, and that's why I'm like, hey, we got to stand and we got to push back against that. And now we need to have a secure border. So let's put everything together, and we reached that. We actually reached that, and it took months. It literally took months.
But give me your utopian version of it. Like, let's assume that you could just get this passed. What would you do? What would you do to secure the border, but also provide a pathway to people that want a better life?
It's only going to have to be a negotiating way that's
Right.
palatable to both sides.
I understand that, but what would you do if you knew you could just get something through without this negotiation? What do you think could be done? What's the best version? What's the utopian version for John Better?
Well, I think eventually, if you are living your best life and you're following the law, and you really just showed up because, hey, I have no path for a life that I would want for my kids. It's like, and that's to me that's very American. And remember
Yes.
what's inside the Statue of Liberty. It's like, send us, our tired, huddled masses too. It wasn't just, hey, send in the PhDs and the
Right.
and those kinds of things. I mean, that's what really made our nation. And the steel industry, in my part of the state, that came from, it was European, it was all kinds of immigrants. They all came in. They couldn't build the houses fast enough, and that was all foreign labor. And a lot of them were sacrificed because it's incredibly a dangerous business in the steel industry.
Yeah.
And that built our nation, and that became part of our society. And that's really every kinds of way, in that. And to me, America has to be open and a path for anyone that's playing by the rules, because the group that you're from, or the part of, you all started the same kind of a process. It's incredible. That's the enduring truth. And that's what made America special and made us make it strong.
I agree with you. So, but what could physically be done to secure the border? I mean, the wall was sort of dismissed during the Trump administration, but it was also discussed during the Obama administration. Even Bill Clinton talked about the importance of having secure borders. What could be done physically to secure the border?
away.
Yeah, well, because it's like that becomes like a
Hostile
third
tank
thing.
marked.
We can't talk about this.
But I understand that politically. Let's just assume that that's not an issue. What would you want to do?
Get out here!
Listen, I would want to make sure that first we have to acknowledge the truth. It's like immigration has been an issue
Emerging
because
danger.
America is an Asian country, and they're coming from broken countries where they've all recognized that there's not a meaningful path for them to have a quality of life, and they're willing to risk their lives. And sometimes they even turn on you. And it's like I can't imagine turning your children over to
Enemy tank over there!
and they're gonna go like if they're trying to
Right there.
imagine I'm like hey in Pennsylvania
Target
walking
marked!
to
70 meters away from
their
your
kids on the
position!
side. I mean it's like these are desperate kinds of situations.
Right.
And it wasn't an invasion in that sense. It was just people wanting to have a part of the American dream.
100%.
And acknowledging where that's at and it needs to have a path. Otherwise you're gonna have to round up and that's not realistic and
Enemy
there's not the
hero on my mark.
resources
70 meters
and
from
that's
your
gonna be
position.
incredibly disruptive and it's gonna be damaging economically as well too.
So how do you provide a pathway while also securing? How do you provide a pathway while also securing the border?
Well, to me, I think we can, chew gum and walk at the same time on this. And it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be messy, and it's not going to be
Right, but what would that look like?
whether there's actually a barrier or hiring thousands and thousands of more agents and whatever that it takes on that. And it's like the best border deal in that situation is the best one that can pass.
Right.
Because otherwise I like boy if I could wake up with a perfect head of hair or I could it's like but it's like practicing the possible, and we were as close as we've ever gained in years and years, and that never
Let's see
came
what we find here.
into.
I understand what you're saying, that it has to pass. But what I'm saying is, imagine that wasn't the case. What could be done? Like if we could all agree, we put politics aside and say, you know what, everything John Fetterman is saying makes total sense.
We have to put that.
We do need a pathway for these people. It is a beautiful part of America. The reason why people come here in the first place is because it's the land of opportunity. But yet we also have to keep Venezuelan gangs and prisoners from coming across, and murderers and gang members and cartel.
Yeah, and we have to weed them out, and we have to deport them. Yeah, we absolutely. It's like this is.
So how do you find them and how do you deport them?
What's that?
How do you find them and how do you deport them?
Well, again, that's just like taking some kind of an inventory of like who's actually here on this, and we have to figure out who's actually here on those kinds of a thing. And there are going to be, statistically, that's a fact that out of X million people, for example, it's a fact that statistically that terrible things are going to be perpetrated by those things. And statistically, in some sense, that Native Americans, not American citizens, and the criminality, if anything, the criminality is slightly higher, in immigration communities as well. And some of the most pro-American kinds of views. That's projected in those kinds of communities. I mean, just like the community that brought my wife and her family to this country, and that's kind of where we're at. And I think what we're seeing now in this cycle, there are more and more Latinos that are changing their views on some of the. They're like, hey, you do need a secure border. It's not necessarily assumed
Helicopter,
because you are a
170 meters
member
away.
of a demographic that it has to. It's not necessarily consistent that it's going to be strong blue kinds of.
But we all want safety, right? We all want safety. We all want. So you want to
Take your assignment 40 meters away from your position.
That's the major impact.
Helicopter.
Of course, and a secure border with more and more resources put on that, and that makes but it's impossible to make sure.
Marking
that
enemy
we're
tank
gonna have
almost 40 meters from your
immigration
position.
community. We're going to commit kinds of terrible crimes at times, and you're going to see, and those are going to be talked about in the popular media. It's undeniable. And
Tango,
it's
on my mark,
incredibly
40 meters from your position.
It's a fact, and that's the truth of the American story. Immigration made our
Right.
negative
Tango.
things and those kinds of resources because we can't possibly support an unchecked kind of situation that we
Hostile
had.
tank
And I
marked
described
40
that.
meters away
If
from
you
your
have
position.
300,000 people showing up at the border, well, that's the side of Pittsburgh. Like, where are they going to go? You know, how are we going to give them an American
Spotted on enemy vehicle.
already? Because they're all going to need to.
Enemy
Assault on
soldiers
Hilton
down.
was begun by our
And that should never be controversial to say that we can't, that's not sustainable. And it's like if we want for every
They're shooting at us.
their American dream, it's impossible if it's unchecked like that. And it shouldn't be controversial to anyone.
No, it's just reasonable. What could be done, and who do you think is going to do a better job to boost our economy?
Well, I think it's undeniable too. I'm certainly not going to discount some of the experience of some people that have been hit by eggs or other things that are
targeted by the enemy.
inflation. But right now, our economy now is the world's envy by any metric. With unemployment, the stock market.
Tracking Hilo. 90 meters from your position.
Hundreds of thousands of new jobs that are being created with all these things. And our inflation now is kind of eased back into the check. But it's undeniable that there was an incredible inflation that certain kinds of families are through those things. And I think that those kinds of wave, whether it's AI or those other kinds of innovations, whether that it's green energy or those kinds of a thing, that's going to continue to juice our economy.
Well, AI is a big fear, right? Because AI is going to come with
Mother-
automation. Automation is going to come with removing
That
jobs.
is a challenge.
Yeah.
On my walk here, well, I didn't walk here, but I saw a Waymo. A Waymo
Yeah.
drove by me, and there was no one in there.
No one in there.
There was no one in that car.
Did you see the
That's the first time I've
traffic
ever
jam?
That's the first time I've ever seen a car and had literally no human within the vehicle. And I was like, what the heck?
There's a bunch of them around Austin, and there was a traffic jam in Austin where they all got together
used to
in the
have-
intersection, and no one knew what to do.
Yeah,
All the robots were just like clogging up this intersection.
a lot of that came from Pittsburgh too, and you would see those kinds of cars, but it always had a human in there. But that was the first time I saw like a robot car driving around in Austin, and yes, that creates. There's a lot of dislocation that's possible.
And that's just the beginning. It's going to be shipping. It's going to be truckers. I mean, that was a big issue with the longshoremen and the Teamsters that were going to go on strike. Yeah, please have some more water.
Thank you.
Welcome. I mean, that was a big part of one of their demands was that they see what's going on in China. They see that they're using automation to completely control shipping yards. That it's all done with machines and computers now. And this is going to displace a lot of people. This is something that Andrew Yang talked about in depth when he was running for president, because he was talking about the need for some kind of universal basic income to provide people with money and food and housing, because jobs are going to be non-existent in a lot of different sectors, a lot of different markets, a lot of different things that have traditionally been done by people. Specifically driving. Driving is going to be a gigantic one. It's all going to be done by computers.
Yeah, well, I mean,
EMG active.
universal basic income. I'm not sure. I don't know, because you're going to have that's a lot of resources to provide a lot of that, and that creates all kinds of other issues and dynamics. But I'm not afraid of
I need to
technology,
reload.
but it's also acknowledging that there are going to be kinds of changes in those things. And I'm a big believer in technology takes us into a more productive kind of economy, and they're going to help solve some of the challenges that we have in our society. For those kinds of things, but I think we have to find the perfect balance, that we don't stifle innovation, but we also have to remember that there are going to be people that might be left behind, or they're going to struggle. I mean, hey, I was married for 13 days and I live in a community that was left behind by some of those things. And now the steel workers,
Should move up there.
I live across the street from the steel mill, and it was announced that Nippon was buying U.S. Steel. And basically, all those steel workers were done. They used euphemisms saying, "Well, we're going to honor current labor deals." If that's a euphemism saying as soon as that's up, you're done,
Right.
and then that's going to be thousands of union jobs. And if you you think it's going to be easy for those men and women to pull down six figures or those kinds of income, it's like, how insensitive to say, well, hey, learn coding. It's like, well, hey, it's not.
Coding's useless anyway. When AI, learning to code's
We
going
are
to be
attacking
useless.
Delta 1.
That's how quickly things change.
It's basically kind of like a fuck you, like good luck.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Well, it's a dumb fucking too, because even when they said learn to code, like that was like, they're saying, hey, you can learn to code.
I'm not going to learn how to read.
But here's the thing, even if you did, that's how quickly things change. Even if you did, now they're telling kids learning coding in universities is not necessarily going to be a pathway to a job, because all coding is going to be done by artificial intelligence.
Yeah, well, but they never even told us that they were going to sell that. And then a staffer sent me a picture from CNN saying that there's selling USD. I'm like, oh, yeah. And so I just went up on my roof and I had a video saying, hey, I promise I'm going to do anything I can to jam that up. And it's like, that's what we did. And we worked with the White House, and then suddenly all of that got jammed up. And suddenly, I'm so surprised, but Nippon found extra billions of dollars to make the kinds of upgrades to secure a future for those facilities in the Mon Valley. And to me, it's about following the union way of life. To me, steel is national security. And to me, if you turn your back on the working union families, I mean, it's like this. It's really hard to replace those things. And so for me, two things are true at the same time. Our economy has when we have an opportunity to stand for the union way of life, and we can't ever just outsource.
Marking on hostile.
Right.
Hostile troop.
So, and that's why we're in that situation right now. That it's like, hey, it's like that's what's true about
Lift up.
some of these industries.
Watch out. 50 meters from your position.
Crazy, and I'd love to find out how much of this is accurate, Jamie. One of the things was, this guy was explaining how scrap metal in the United States is shipped to China, where they make things with it instead of making things here. And then we buy what they make with our scrap metal, which seems to me
Tango, on my mark.
kind of insane.
130 meters. I saw
The
hostile.
death of American manufacturing is a significant problem that we faced. And it was really highlighted during COVID, right, where there wasn't ships coming in because everything was kind of locked down for a while. And people realized, like, hey, so much of what we need, particularly computer chips and medicine, so much of what we need is being made overseas.
I agree, and then that's why Congress came together and President Biden led the whole chips.
Very excited.
legislation.
Distance.
And it's
100.
like we got to make shit in America.
overwhelmed.
And it's like, of course,
We
the
must take
future
our
is in
losses and
those
retreat
kinds
while
of
we still can.
industries and those things. So we have to protect the American economy for that thing, and that's why that's a bipartisan kinds of a push for that. And COVID, that relieved a lot of vulnerabilities. It's like where a lot of these things come from, or so. But going forward on that, it's like we can never just surrender that American manufacturing. We can't assume and we can't allow that to turn completely outsourced.
No, I mean, it would be horrible, and it would be nice to bring things back. And it's also, one of the things we've been discussing a lot is that so many of the things that we need today, like particularly phones, are being made in an unethical way, like where we would never allow the working conditions that exist in these factories overseas, where American corporations are having their products made in a way that you would never legally be able to do in America, and yet they're doing this just to make more money. And that,
yeah, well, I mean, let's also talk about rare
earth minerals
stuff. I mean,
yeah.
the Chinese have strategically just snapped up that markets. I mean, that's